Thank you for coming, everybody. I know it's a cold night, hard to get here on a cold night. This teach-in is being sponsored by WAM, North American Water Office, Nuke Watch, and
the Environment Indigenous
Environmental and Indigenous Network, and the Coalition for a Non-Nuclear Mississippi River.
I don't know if I can do that.
So,
Okay.
that's
Never mind.
who we're sponsoring. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the people who are speaking. First, we're going to do a little skit that Kelly Levine wrote, and it'll kind of give you an idea of what the whole issue is about Monticello nuclear plant. And particularly watch the last scene where the public has a voice, because this public that Kelly wrote about is very up on things and very informed. So you'll see one of them holding a Nuke Watch, which is from Nuke Watch in Luck, Wisconsin. They've been fighting, I don't want to use that word, they've been against nuclear weapons and nuclear power for I don't know how many years.
It says one person.
A long
And they have people can subscribe to them.
Yeah, we have newsletters over on the table, by the way. And you can take one and you can find out how to subscribe to more newsletters. Am I doing okay as far as loudness?
Yep.
Okay. Then the North American Water Office is, the director of that is
George.
George Crocker. Sorry, I was trying to find my notes.
And there's the book over there.
And his book is over here, if anybody wants to buy a copy. How much is it?
It's $20, and Wham gets 5 of it.
All right.
He's donating 5 to Wayne. Thank you.
Per book. So,
Great book.
So buy them all.
Yeah,
Great book, I read it.
yeah. It is a
And
great book.
there's jokes,
Thanks,
too,
Joe.
anyway.
And I want to tell you a little bit about George. He calls the company his
It's a nonprofit.
nonprofit.
Very
is,
nonprofit.
has been working for against nuclear power and for renewables for more than 40 years. Is that correct?
Well,
Yes, sir.
Yep, yep.
Okay. And he's written this book about power, how to democratize electricity now. And it tells you his story and also how we can go to renewables and community power quite easily. I hope I didn't give you a whole talk.
Yeah, I can go home now.
And he also is, he's also involved in a new pursuit. It's called the Berry Project, to help restore food sovereignty to the Red Lake, White Earth, and Leech Lake Anishinaabe nations by planting fruit trees and berries.
How about his wife Leah?
That's what I do.
That's what Leah does. That's,
Thanks for that, Leah.
and
Could you introduce yourself?
You stand up and you say your name.
I have a cookie in my mouth and I'm ready.
Fauché. Is it Fauché?
Yes.
Leah Fauché. Okay. I think that's all I have to say. Now we're going to collect our props. And Sarah, you get.
Nuke Watch, I got one up here.
I know. I'm sorry. Carolyn did this.
All right, here, come on.
No, you don't have to come in yet. Lindsay, yeah, I'll come up.
brought you by the, anybody else need to
Thanks.
write their
Brought you
stuff?
by
the Don't Nuke Our River Players.
Yes.
That's a lot.
Oh, I also wanted to mention that we'll be talking about the NRC and the environmental impact statement, right? EIS. This is it. It's over 400 pages. I think before they had the public comment period, they only gave us a couple of weeks to look through this thing. So we did an extended public comment period, right? So that was a good thing. Okay. Should we stand in front? Yeah, sure. Yeah. Oh, now we need our sign. Okay.
So, no
Can
need.
you, like, come up and walk across?
Okay.
Yeah. This is scene one. It takes place on November 21st, 2022.
Good job.
Oh no! A radioactive leak? Nuclear Regulatory Commission, NRC, help!
No, what's wrong? Excel, whatever the problem is, we have great public relations people that turn hazardous situations into Sesame Street.
Look! Cooling water is leaking out of the pipes
Oh,
into
no.
the groundwater under Monticello.
How much leaked?
I don't know.
Well, you sure don't know a lot of stuff.
What will the public think of us? It measured at 5 million picocuries per liter of tritium concentration.
Aha, I just have a plan. Whenever you have a serious accident, but you don't really know what's going on, you always tell the public the same thing. It worked at all these other places where there were accidents. Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, Fukushima. Just tell them there was no impact on the health and safety of the public or plant personnel.
Do we have to tell the public?
Yes. The law says so. It says here on page 483. Right here.
Do we have to?
Yes. Otherwise, they might say we don't have public transparency. Besides, the NRC is the agency regulating the nuclear reactors all around the country. Everybody trusts us, and you should too.
Can we just whisper?
Okay. There was a major radioactive leak at the Monticello nuclear reactor, a few hundred feet from the Mississippi River. 5 million picocuries per liter of tritium.
Did you say something?
Me? No, nothing.
I thought I heard you say
They
something.
said nothing. They said nothing.
Well, excuse me. I mean, forget that I asked.
Hey, can we still apply for that license extension to run the reactor for another 20 years?
Of course. We won't let a little more cancer get in the way of business as usual.
Is this scene 2?
It is scene 2, March 2023.
Oh no! It's leaking again!
What? Not again? What is wrong with you people?
Well, we were doing our job, gathering up that radioactive leak, but it started leaking again.
Well, we're gonna have to tell the public this time.
Oh, too bad.
Did you ever figure out how much leaked last time?
Let's see. Yeah, looks like 400,000 gallons, give or take.
Why is your nose growing? Well, go tell the public now.
Okay. The Monticello reactor has been producing clean energy for the last 53 years. We provide jobs. We help the economy. We have a clean record. Except today when there was a little radioactive leak, it did not affect any drinking water. It did not reach the Mississippi River, and there's no way that it can. Our workers are safe. The residents of Monticello are safe. And so are you.
You learned about this leak about 4 months ago. Why did it take you so long to notify the public about the radioactive leak?
You know that our first priority is public safety. If it would have been a danger, we would have told you. We understand your concern, though. There's no pathway for the leak to get into drinking water. You're safe with us. You can trust me.
Well, if it was so safe, why didn't you tell us before?
Excel is committed to transparency and honesty. We have had people working night and day to investigate the leak, and now that we know this, we can honestly tell you how safe you have always been.
July 27th, 2023.
Getting closer together.
Oh, looks like this radio.
Pass that. Wrong side.
Cool. July 27th, 2023. What is time? Looks like this radioactive water is getting into the Mississippi River.
Into the river?
Well, who really can say? Our tests only detect higher levels of radioactive tritium. So when we test for it, it won't show up.
Yeah. Oh, you are so sneaky. We can say it was undetected.
Mm-hmm.
If it's undetected, the public will think that means none.
Hey, NRC, does anyone care what the Environmental Protection Agency thinks these days?
Not usually. Why?
Well, the tritium levels are above the drinking water limit of 20,000 picocuries per liter in wells near the river.
Yeah, some people will think that's a problem. Suddenly excited. You can start by building a big wall.
Oh,
No radioactive water will be able to get past that.
splendid idea. I like big walls.
Also, you better stop testing the water so we don't get any more bad news.
Ah, yes, we can do that. But what will we do about this drinking water rule?
According to my rule book, most people don't know that the same Mississippi River water that flows by the reactor also provides drinking water to 20 million people, including Minneapolis, St. Paul, and 11 suburbs. And according to official guidelines in section 536462 gobbledygook 484, we don't have to tell anyone until next May. So by then, no one will care.
Yeah, but what about our new license? You have to get public comments for us to get our license, right?
You mean this one?
Mm-hmm.
Well, don't worry about that. We don't usually We don't usually care about what the public says. We could get 3,349 comments opposing you running that jalopy for years. And we will just look the other way. Still thinking. And for those people who do care, I have a plan. When we ask for public comments, we will only consider comments about what happened at Monticello before August 18th. If someone complains about what happened after that, it doesn't count. Hoo-hoo for the public.
Hey, you're brilliant. I'm glad we're partners.
Yeah, that's right. Big business and government always need to work side by side. December 14th, 18th, 2023. Hey, Excel! We're putting together some information about the leak because, for some reason, people are still worried. How much did you say that leak was?
Well, I said it was 400,000 gallons.
You don't seem real sure about that.
Well, I might have put a decimal point in the wrong place or pressed the wrong button, but so now it's looking more like 800,000 gallons.
800,000 gallons. Twice the amount you told us last time. Oh, okay. We'll have you go. Oh, okay. Well, here you go. There it is.
Great.
What could go wrong? There's more.
You're reading. Aren't you reading that? Open it up to read what's in here. Okay.
Didn't they say that the radioactive leak may have reached the edge of the Mississippi River? It never actually got into the river though, right? It was never detected?
Press.
Well, I have the DEIS, and I've read this document through and through, and they doubled the amount they said it leaked a year later. It was almost like there were 2 leaks.
No.
Oh, well, so, yeah.
What are you gonna do with the
That's what
media?
they said. It says likely reached the river.
Isn't that lying?
Remember, they didn't tell us about the leak for 4 months.
And
Then
then,
they-
and
and then
then,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm
And
sorry.
then they doubled the amount they said leaked a year later. It was almost like there were 2 leaks.
Are you saying that Excel is deliberately withholding information from the public?
Well, they did cut off the information gathering period about Monticello for public comments the same day the tritium level passed the drinking water limits.
Didn't they say tritium is harmless? But look here, the National Academies of Science say there is no safe level of tritium exposure.
Oh, yeah, the NRC website says the same thing.
But look, this is in Nuke Watch. If a pregnant person drinks it or breathes it, it crosses the placenta. You are more likely to get leukemia, birth abnormalities. Babies can be born with cancer as a result of exposure.
Did you know there have been 4,000 unexplained additional deaths around the reactor site since it started operating. The cancer rates skyrocketed. Childhood death from cancer too. And if they keep the reactor going another 20 years at this rate, there could be another 800 deaths.
I think Excel's making all this stuff up about the leak being safe, and the NRC is trying to cover up for them.
Let's get them. Help me find Mark.
Nothing can stop me!
Get away from us. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Hey, here's the license extension.
All right.
Yay!
All right.
Hooray!
So, after that introduction,
There might be questions or comments.
oh, questions or comments? That's a good idea. Are there questions or comments about our skit?
Did you have fun?
It was really fun. It was fun watching everybody else make mistakes too.
Kind of horrifying.
We only rehearsed for 2 weeks.
Yeah, we haven't
Almost
rehearsed.
a double the volume of your mistakes.
Spontaneous. Anything else?
I suspect the speakers will put this in some kind of perspective.
Yeah, I hope so. And Lindsay, are you gonna speak next, or is it gonna be George? Which one of you wanna go first?
Okay, I guess I'll go first, and then maybe George can, go last so that he can fill us all with hope of what's alternatives for the future. So let's see. Just a set a timer for myself here. Let's see if that's helpful. Okay, so I'm Lindsay Potter. I work with Nuke. We're located in Luck, Wisconsin, but we also do a lot of collaborative work here in the Twin Cities. Nuke has been around since 1979. I have not. And so we're really grateful to WHAM and the North American Water Office, Indigenous Environmental Partners, and the Rainbow Warrior Collective, and the other members represented in the Coalition for Nuclear Free Mississippi River. So I'm here tonight on behalf of that coalition and of Nuke Watch. Anyway, the skit that you just heard kind of summarizes a little bit of the events that have taken place since November 2022 up until now regarding the leak of the Monticello nuclear reactor, owned by Excel, operated by Excel and Northern States Power. I'm going to go through a little bit of that summary of the timeline, and then I'm mostly going to speak about a couple of the documents that have come out, published by the NRC, and some of the information that Excel has made publicly available since this happened, just because that is kind of the portion of this that's most within my wheelhouse in the research that I have done. There are obviously a lot of different topics that this involves, that this touches on. There are some things that I, won't be able to talk about. But anyway, as you heard in the skit, the NRC and Excel have been very fond over the last 1.5 to 2 years of constantly asserting that there is no impact to the health and safety of the public or plant personnel. And they print this ad nauseum throughout the environmental impact statement, throughout their press releases. They often say it just like to punctuate the end of a paragraph, but they don't give data to substantiate that claim. And so that's been one of my biggest qualms with all of this, has been trying to find the data and struggling to. So much of what I will speak about, like I said, is compiled from the NRC's final environmental impact statement, which was issued on November 15th. I'm also going to take some information from the annual radioactive effluent release report, which Excel is required to publish annually. So the report for 2023 was published in May of 2024. Maybe one of those every May, more or less. So the Monticello nuclear reactor is owned by Xcel Energy, operated, like I said, by Xcel and Northern States Power. It has about a maximum output of 691 megawatts. The reactor is now 54 years old, among the oldest in the United States, and Xcel wants to run it until 2050. So they've applied for a second license renewal they've already had received a first 20-year license extension. And so that's the application that's currently being considered by the NRC. The NRC stands to issue a decision on that by the end of this year. That would be, running it till 2050 would make the reactor 80 years old, or twice its design-based lifespan of 40 years. No nuclear reactor has been run so long. In addition to amassing new mountains of radioactive waste on the shores of the Mississippi River, the banks, I should say, of the Mississippi River, within that river's floodplain, with no long-term storage options for that waste, 25 more years of operating such an old reactor means an ever greater likelihood of accidents and leaks due to corroded infrastructure. So one of the first things I want to talk about is the relationship between the reactor and the water. So the Monticello reactor sits on the Mississippi River in Monticello, Minnesota, about 35 miles north of the Twin Cities. The Mississippi River is the second longest river in North America. It flows about 2,300 miles. The first place that draws drinking water from the Mississippi River is St. Cloud, which is about 30 miles upstream of Monticello. The Minneapolis Waterworks Reservoir is supplied by the Mississippi River. That's 37 miles downstream from Monticello. And so is the St. Paul water intake, which is 34 miles downstream from Monticello. At least 20 million more people downstream obtain drinking water from the Mississippi River. Under normal site hydraulic conditions, groundwater flow under the Monticello reactor is toward the Mississippi River. As on-site groundwater is hydraulically connected to the river, therefore groundwater flow reversal can occur due to changes in hydraulic gradient during periods of high river stage. So this is a quote from, this is the NRC's own language, and what that means is that in times of snow melt or high river water, the river water is reversing the flow of the groundwater and commingling with it, and then as the water levels decrease over the summer, for example, then the flow reverses back in the groundwater flowing towards the river. So the NRC often notes that there are points at which tritium levels spike, for example, because the river water comes in and will push a bunch of the tritium plume back into a well that had seen a decrease as that tritium had flown towards the river. And so it will spike, and then as the river water recedes, it pulls it with it, and the levels will decrease. They say that that is what has explained variations in tritium levels since 2009 in one of their main monitoring wells, 9A, which is directly below the pipe that leaked in 2022. So during groundwater flow reversal, tritium concentrations may increase in wells that are normally up gradient of the tritium plume. There are approximately 178 registered groundwater drinking wells within a 2-mile radius of the Monticello power block area. The nearest registered drinking well to Monticello is domestic water well that is 0.6 miles southwest of the center of the site. Monticello is permitted to draw 20 million gallons of groundwater per year and to pump up to 75% of the flow of the water through the Mississippi River, according to the EIS. Though on average, Monticello pumps between 4 and 11% of the Mississippi River volume through its cooling system. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has delineated flood hazard areas in the vicinity of the Monticello site. The NRC staff did not identify any new and significant information regarding the surface water affected environment during the site audit, the scoping process, or as the result of its review of available information as cited in this EIS. So that means that the NRC looked at all of the information that was available to them, and they decided that there is no new or significant information regarding affected surface water in the environment around Monticello. Okay, so as far as licensing goes, the state of, aside from the NRC, which is the federal license grantor for the operation of the reactor, the state of Minnesota and the Minnesota Pollution Control to grant the water permits necessary for the reactor to operate, and they also found nothing amiss. So, according to the EIS, the NRC licensees must meet state water quality certification requirements. The EPA or the state set the limits for effluents. And the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency reissued Monticello's 5-year permit in May 2023. The EIS writes, quote, based on its review, NRC staff did not identify any substantial changes in the 2023 permit conditions as compared to the previous issuance. So as of August 18th, 2023, there were 3 permits that were updated or changed because of the 2022 leak. But these were only to allow for the construction of holding ponds to contain all of the tritiated water that has been pumped up out of the groundwater by Xcel since 2022. But none of the other licenses required for the reactor to operate have changed as a result thus far. The NRC stands poised to issue Xcel this new license extension by the end of the year. The Minnesota Public Utilities Commission can prevent Monticello from continuing to operate until 2050 by declining Xcel's preferred plan for energy generation, also called the IRP, or Integrated Resource Plan, and that's now under consideration before the PUC. The public hearing on this will be held in February 2025. Okay, so the series of events that we just learned from this skit, I'll go over them briefly one more time. November 21st, 2022, a sample from monitoring well 9A recorded a tritium concentration of 5,020,000 picocuries per liter. Because of that reading, a voluntary notification was sent to the state of Minnesota and the NRC by Xcel on November 22nd, 2023. The notice states that there was no impact to the health and safety of the public or plant personnel identified. There's
Or
only
the
about,
environment,
right.
or the environment.
Well, they don't actually say that, but they don't care. There's only like 3 sentences in that notification about what happened. There's no data provided, but yet they immediately, first day that they notify anybody, say there's no impact to the health and safety of the public or plant personnel. Samples from monitoring well 9A also recorded 147 picocuries per liter of iodine 133. Barium 140 was detected in monitoring well 9A, monitoring well 12A, and well 30A and 37A. So 37A is right by the river as well. At maximum concentration of about 321 picocuries per liter. Cesium 134 was detected in well 4 at an approximate concentration of 3 picocuries per liter. On December 21st, 2022, Xcel Energy identified the leak location, so it took them a month to find where it was leaking from. It was a 3-inch condensate to control rod drive suction line pipe between the reactor building and the turbine building. Diversion of the leak effluent using a catchment system, coupled with a groundwater recovery system at wells 9A, 9B, and 12A, was installed in January 2023. The effluent was directed to holding tanks, waste process systems, and or reused on site. On March 2023, sampling results indicated that the effluent was no longer contained within the catchment system. So what they set up to try to catch and hold the water that was leaking failed. The plant was fully shut down as a result of that discovery on March 25th, 2023, and the pipe that had leaked was removed and replaced. Additionally, beginning in December 2022, Monticello expanded the network of on-site monitoring wells, adding between December of 2022 and August of 2023 around 40 new wells to better assess the extent of the tritium pollution. On May 23rd, Xcel Energy provided an additional notice to the state of Minnesota and the NRC to report a release of 300 to 600 gallons of water with a tritium activity of 194,000 picocuries per liter that had spilled from a holding tank associated with the ongoing remediation efforts. Finally, 13 months after the initial leak, Xcel told the NRC in response to a letter requesting further information on a separate issue that the leak was now estimated to be 829,000 rather than 400,000 gallons, with a total activity of 14 curies. Xcel continued to insist there was no impact to the health and safety of the public or plant personnel, and that they continue to work to minimize the discharge of tritiated groundwater to the Mississippi River, but they cannot stop it. Despite constant assertion that the radioactive water could not reach the river, the draft environmental impact statement, published April 19th maybe of 2024, acknowledged that tritiated water likely reached the river. NRC personnel were pushed to apologize for this miscommunication, in their words, publicly at their hearing in May of 2024. So there's pumping now going on. That's part of the remediation effort. There were 8 pumping wells for tritium extraction installed since the detection of the leak. A storage pond was constructed for managing recovered groundwater with elevated tritium activity, and they're constructing a second pond that should be done by the end of this year. As of October 2023, approximately 6.6 million gallons of tritium-contaminated groundwater have been pumped from on-site. Because the combined rate of tritium recovery and gradient control pumping is expected to exceed 100 gallons per minute, the NRC staff evaluated the potential effects of these groundwater withdrawals on other water users or uses. As discussed in this EIS, groundwater flow in the superficial aquifer tends to be toward the Mississippi River. So that's 6.5 million gallons and counting that would have been flowing to the river that they're pumping. Xcel Energy has stated that it will continue tritium recovery until tritium in all on-site groundwater monitoring wells is below the EPA's maximum contaminant level of 20,000 picocuries per liter, and it's not yet. The total duration of the pumping is thus unknown. So NRC staff has concluded that over the license extension period of operation, there will still likely remain groundwater contamination on site, and that pumping will likely continue. So they're talking about, at this point, beyond 2030 and up until possibly 2050, there will remain contamination of tritium in the groundwater, and they will continue pumping, possibly at this rate. Yet, somehow, the NRC can conclude that no off-site wells are expected to be affected by the on-site tritium recovery and the gradient-controlled groundwater pumping. So a total of, 0.388 curies of tritium, they estimate, has been released via natural evaporation from the temporary tanks and the water storage ponds. In addition to extracting the groundwater, a sheet pile wall was constructed at Monticello near the Mississippi riverbank to minimize tritium discharge from groundwater into the river. As of August 30th, 2023, there are 5 gradient control wells installed upflow. So what that means is they put 5 wells in where they're pumping up clean groundwater before it flows in and mingles with the groundwater under the Monticello reactor site in order to try to keep the level of the groundwater low enough that their wall might be in some way effective. That's their plan. They pump up clean groundwater to keep it from mixing with the tritiated groundwater and to keep the whole groundwater level low enough that it will work with their wall and not go into the river. I still have not found a clear diagram of the location of the sheet pile wall relative to the wells that are nearest the river, nor have I found a detailed description of the construction timeline of the sheet pile wall. I know when they began, but I don't know how long it took them to finish. It appears that some wells, especially well 29A, for example, that are near the river, we're still seeing rising tritium levels into the fall of 2023 up until November or December of 2023, and the wall construction was begun in August of 2023. Okay, so the EIS says that monitoring data from the initial leak detection, which actually was on November 11th, they didn't notify until the 21st, indicates a downward trend in tritium activity for the groundwater most impacted by the release. So they say this in the EIS. They say, oh, the groundwater is showing a downward trend. That's true of the monitoring well directly below the leak that had the 5 million picocurie per liter concentration, because they've pumped a lot of that water out. And so yes, the readings in that well have gone down for tritium. But over the same time period, readings in several other wells, especially the ones closest to the river where the groundwater is slowly migrating to, their readings have gone up and or fluctuated rather inconsistently over the same time period. That one sentinel well below the leak is still elevated above the 20,000 picocurie per liter drinking water limit. The EIS says tritium levels measured in river samples collected upstream and downstream of the site from January to December 2023 indicated no detectable increase in tritium activity in the downstream samples. So that's text from the EIS, and they say that, but yet they have a chart in there that shows a few months of sustained elevated tritium levels. So I have some images, apologize, they're somewhat blurry, from the EIS that I printed out, and so maybe I'll just start passing these around. The one on top, as of right now, is the measured tritium concentrations in the river upstream and downstream of the plant. And you'll see that from July up until the end of September, it doesn't go back down to zero. But you can pass those around. There's several different other charts and graphs in there for everyone to look at. Okay, so overall, Monticello reported an abnormal discharge to the Mississippi River of tritium-contaminated groundwater of 0.167 curies, which is 167 billion picocuries, between July 27th and December 31st of 2023. The newly published version of the EIS is continuing the same trend of whitewashing or minimization that was present in the draft. All right. So, Excel started sampling the city of Minneapolis drinking water supply and the Mississippi River, and those samples, let's see, they started taking those samples weekly, and they have not published all of that information. So for the EIS, the data collection period officially ended on August 18th of 2023. And on that same day, one of the wells closest to the river, 37A, peaked over the 20,000 picocurie per liter EPA limit. There was another well that on August 18th, that's close to the river, 29A, that on August 18th was at something like 37,000 picocuries per liter. And both of these wells have been trending up for several weeks, and yet the NRC still chose to end its data gathering consideration period for trying to determine the environmental impact of running this reactor, despite the fact that both of those measurements were at a critical point of surpassing the EPA limit at that time. I'm running out of time here, so rather than read the rest of this, I'll try to summarize it for you. So anyway, the Excel says that following this leak, they started to take weekly samples of almost half, I think, of their monitoring wells. They were taking weekly samples, and they started to take weekly samples at the Minneapolis water intake and in the river upstream and downstream. But this information hasn't been published. So the NRC sent a request to Excel in December, on December 18th of 2023, asking for further information regarding something with the EIS, and Excel responded with a chart, and they published the well test data up until August 18th, which is when they ceased their data collection period. And in that well test data, you see that there are several wells close to the river that are trending up towards or have already surpassed this EPA drinking water limit of the concentration of tritium. And yet the NRC did not demand further information, at least that they have publicly published, regarding the well test data, beyond what's published in the annual radioactive effluent release report, which one might logically conclude would contain all of the well test data that Excel has for the calendar year of 2023. However, that's not the case. In the annual radioactive effluent release report, there are what seem to be a very small number of randomly selected, I don't know, cherry-picked well tests that are available. So even in these wells that they say they have been testing weekly, in the annual radioactive report, they only submit a compilation of quarterly samples, for example. So in these wells right by the river that had surpassed the drinking water limit, you don't see what happens in the subsequent weeks. Instead, you get a single additional well test for the last quarter of 2023. So it's very hard for me, reading through these documents, to try to paint a clear picture of exactly where the tritium's moving or when, And Excel says they have this data, but for some reason, in assessing the environmental impact, the NRC has not seen fit to demand the rest of this data from them, and the public hasn't seen the data because it's not published or publicly available. So, and it's not linear. So there's wells. You know, they like to report that the wells that had gone above 20,000 picocuries per liter are now showing quite low numbers. But that means with the way the groundwater is flowing that tritium is no longer in that well because it likely discharged to the river. The other thing that is unusual is that in some of the data they've published, you have a well that is reporting something like 7,000 picocuries per liter 1 month, and then the next month it's 147,000 picocuries per liter, or sometimes it goes the other way around, and you're not seeing what happens in between. So, let's see. I think, the last thing is there's a chart in the handouts that I passed around that shows that the greatest estimated discharge of tritium to the river took place in September of 2023. And that's Excel's own estimation based on their modeling. And so that is still technically outside of the scope of the NRC's environmental impact statement. So anyway, this is not necessarily a news story for Excel or the NRC. Excel has a long list of accidents, leaks, and failures, as well as a history of falsifying information. In 2015, Monticello Excel was found to have falsified weld tests at Monticello, and now this year Excel has applied to the NRC for an outright exemption for some of those weld tests, and that may or may not be granted also by the end of this year. So I'll stop there. That's sort of an overview of what I have found in these documents, and I can should I take some questions now or let George speak and then we'll do all the questions at the end?
Why don't we have George speak and then we'll do questions?
Okay, thanks.
So I'm George Crocker. I'm the Executive Director of the North American Water Office. And we've been at it for quite a long time, and I can tell by looking at you that you all have the question as to how did that damn leak happen? Well, it was a design flaw. Back when they built the plant, and it came online in 1970, why, this is a boiling water reactor. Do you know what a boiling water reactor is? So there's essentially in the United States, there's two types of commercial reactors. There's boiling water reactors such as Monticello, Fukushima was a boiling water reactor. They're made by General Electric. And then there's what they call pressurized water reactors. They were fabricated by Westinghouse. Prairie Island reactors, there's two of them down there. They're pressurized water reactors. But what happened at Monticello to cause this leak was that when they built the plant, you have to sort of understand the general flow of things in a nuclear plant. So you have this core. At a boiling water reactor, you have the core, which is the reactor fuel, and it is surrounded by primary water. In a boiling water reactor, that hot irradiated fuel, because of the chain reaction of exploding uranium atoms, creating all of that heat is absorbed by the water, it boils furiously, and that steam is channeled through pipes and jetted onto the turbine to spin the turbine to generate the electricity. And then that primary water goes through a condenser, and it's condensed back into water. It's saturated steam after it leaves the turbine, and then it gets into the condenser where it's cooled back to water and pumped back into the core for reheating and boiling and things. So that's the primary loop. The secondary loop is the condenser water that goes through the condenser, and a series of cooling. It's drawn from the river, and it goes through a series of procedures to cool it after it has taken the heat out of that spent primary water, and that it's that condenser water that they had the trouble with. As the primary water was going through, there's the condenser building, and there's the reactor building. And there's a pipe underground that connects the condenser building with the reactor building. And the water flowing through that pipe is what keeps the reactor cool enough so that it doesn't go fluey. Well, the design flaw was that they forgot to put a roof between the two buildings. It's as simple as that. And as a result, over time, over the 50 years or so now that reactor's been operating, it rained from time to time, and sometimes there was snow, and there was the ground, the rainwater and the snow fell on it through the gap in these buildings and saturated or got into the ground around that pipe, and it rusted the pipe. And so the pipe broke. And so they still had water going through it, but they noticed a change in the pressures and in the amount of feed water makeup they had to do. And so they eventually started looking in their wells, and that's when they found that they were leaking all of this water. So that's why it's as simple as that, is why we have this problem. I'm going to just briefly describe the flow of things in a pressurized water reactor, because if we're talking about Coalition for Nuclear-Free Mississippi River, that's more than just Monticello. Prairie Island's 40 miles on the other side of the Twin Cities, and there's a bunch more going down to the Gulf. And there's also reactors on the feeder rivers coming into the Mississippi. And if we're talking about a nuclear-free Mississippi River, we've got our work to do. And I think part of tonight we should be talking about how we're going to, what is that work that we should be doing, and how are we going to organize ourselves, or at least how are we going to start talking with each other about how to organize ourselves to start doing this work that needs to be done. So a pressurized water reactor has 3 water loops, not 2, like a boiling water reactor. The primary water in a reactor like Prairie Island is contained in the primary water loop, which is under extreme pressure. It's like 700 pounds per square inch of pressure. Maybe it's 1,200, so that the water can heat up to 600 degrees Fahrenheit without boiling, because it's under all of that pressure. And then it's that steam generators where we had the problems with Prairie Island a few years back. There's a nice story about it in About Power in the book, and that's where some of the best jokes are too. So that water doesn't boil, but it goes through a steam generator, and it gives up its heat to the secondary water that goes through the turbine, and that goes then through a condenser building where it's cooled by the 3rd water loop, which is river water. And there's leaks all over the place. The way they know how much is leaking, not only at Monticello, but also at Prairie Island, is that they measure the radioactive content of the secondary water. And then they know how much is leaking and whether or not they have to stop and fix things. So there's all sorts of little interesting tidbits to learn about how all of this stuff works. But I really, really want us to think about, this is not just Monticello. This is a lot more than just Monticello. And it's also a lot more than just nuclear power. It's how do we deliver electric utility services for each other. That's what we got to get a grip on. Because if we got a grip on that, if we actually had a society that was functionally literate relative to energy, we wouldn't tolerate this stuff, nor would we need to. It would be totally obsolete. The reason we have these reactors doing what they do is because that is the way that the utility industry maintains its monopoly. It's regulated monopoly. There's no reason for that. There's a historical reason for it, as we were coming into the electrical age, and there's quite a bit of stuff in my book about that too. But it has to do with the fact that historically, as we built power plants, as they got bigger and bigger and bigger, each unit of production got cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, so they biggered them. And they biggered them until they blew them up. That's how they found the limits, as the coefficients of expansion and other things getting in the way of their profits, so then they realized they had to scale back at that point. But that was what drove us to the point of finding how big power plants can be. So if we get serious about how we're going to deliver our electric utility services, when we will start to understand that the economies of scale are drastically different now. It's no longer how to make them bigger and bigger to get them cheaper and cheaper, but it's how to make more and more of all of the components that are available now for providing electric utility services. There's all of the renewable technologies, the winds and the solar and the fuel cells and biomass and all of that. All of those are not custom built power plants like the central station machines. Rather, they're all made of components that are manufactured in mass production. Whether it's fuel cells or solar panels or wind turbines, all of those components are manufactured. And the more of them we make, the cheaper they get. So we want to make lots and lots of them. And that's what the challenge is, because the modern technologies are inherently democratic because of those cost economies of scale that are built into it. And that means it's at odds with the conventional central station machines, which has the regulated monopolies. And so the time has come for us to figure out how to organize ourselves in such a way that allows us to not just complain about nuclear power, but to confront the electric utility industry about how to democratize electricity. How to do it in such a way that allows communities, the communities that use the power, to be the ones that are also engaged in the production of it and enjoying the economic benefits that come along with the production of that power, of that economic activity. And so when we get to that point, why we really do have an awful lot of organizing to do. There's lots of organizations working on it. Community Power, Brian is here, one of the organizations that I helped co-found a while back. There's the Cub, there's Sierra Club, there's a whole list of organizations that are working on this, but it's not really happening. And I think that it's not really happening, the transition isn't happening at the rate that it can, and we still have the regulated monopolies running the nukes and the rest of it, because too many of us are functionally illiterate about energy. I mean, how many of us know the difference between a kilowatt hour and a megawatt?
Yeah.
You know? And if we don't know that, how are we going to argue with the power company? You know? So we got some work to do for all of this. So let me just talk a little bit more about some of the specific problems with the reactors, with it. And then what I'd like us to do is to have a conversation about where are we going to go with this? What are we going to do with it? Right? Okay. So this leak that we've been talking about, this leak is a minor thing compared to what's actually going on at Monticello. since its inception, since it came online in 1970, why, it releases radioactive gases. I mean, these gases are a function of nuclear fission. When you're blowing up uranium atoms, in order to produce that heat, you get everything in the periodic chart, some more than others, big chunks and little chunks, and they're all radioactive. Some of them have very short half-lives. Some of them have very, very long half-lives. Some of them are solids. Some of them are gases. And some of those gases are very potent. And so what we do with these reactors, as the water that's driving the system absorbs these gases in the course of contact with the fission, and the gases get into the water, and they have to be stripped out. Because if they're not stripped out of that water column, why, you know what a vapor lock is? Like in a car, where you get this, the fluids can't flow anymore because you got too many gases trapped in a certain spot. So you got to bleed get the gases out of these places. So you got to take them out, but they're very radioactive. So you got to contain them. So we got to put them into a container to hold them. So what happens when you continually put more and more gas into an enclosed container? The pressure rises. And the pressure will continue rising as long as you're putting more gases into it. And you got to keep putting more gases into it because you got to strip them out of the water column, otherwise you'll vapor lock your reactor. And so you get these gases into this container, and it gets more and more and more pressure. And if you continue putting more and more gas into a confined space, eventually it's going to go fluid. And so they let it out. They wait for a prescribed period of time, and then they wait for a prescribed meteorological circumstance, and then they release the radioactive gases. And the monitoring around the plant is designed to tell you if you've got an accident, but you would think that if you're operating a nuclear power plant, you would know you had an accident before you saw the monitoring for the radiation. You would hope so anyway. Well, the monitoring that they do have around those plants is not designed to detect these gases. It's designed to tell them if something went horribly south. And so the gases get released, and nobody tracks where they go. We don't know where they go. We know that they follow the air currents, and if you're in a river valley, like these plants are, you know, there's eddies and currents and gullies and ravines where things can accumulate and stay for prolonged periods of time, and if people are living there, they're going to breathe it. And they'll get a dose no matter what the NRC or the health department or anybody else says, because they don't know where it's going. They're not even interested in monitoring where it goes. So what a result of this is that before 1970, when Monticello came online, the cancer rates in Sherburne and Wright counties, the plant sits sort of right on the border between the two. And there's other counties that are affected, but this is where we have the analyzed data from, and it's Joseph Mangano who's done it. The exposure to these gases caused the cancer rates, which were below the national average up until 1970, and then for the few years after that, as the plant initially started operating, there's that latency time. Over that period of time, the cancer deaths in the National Cancer Institute data have indicated that before, well, they say that before that 1970 time, the cancer incidence in those two counties was significantly less than the state and the national averages. Since then, it's risen. And the explanation for the rise, I mean, there's many causes of cancer, right? If you, a farmer doing all sorts of petrochemical, there's all sorts of confusion that you can get in there. But the one thing that we know is that these gases have been released. We know they're radioactive. We know that that's carcinogenic. And we see the data saying that there was somewhere in the neighborhood of, what was it, 4,000 excess deaths up until 2023, I think, is what Joe McDonald said. 8,000. If we continue 20 more years after 2030, which is when the license expires, this will be the third license extension. The first one was in 1990. The second one was in 2010. The third one is now 2030, and they want to keep it going until 2050 with this third extension with it. So if the plant actually operates until 2050, continuing on the course, just standard operating procedure, that will be somewhere between another 800 and 1,600 deaths of cancers. They're harvesting souls. That's 1 or 2 people a week. That's a serial killer, is what it is. They are allowed to take bodies every week for the next 20 years, till 2050 and beyond, and we're letting them do it. All we of us are allowing ourselves to be so abused. For what? We do not need nuclear power to keep the lights on. We do not need to have Xcel Energy as a monopoly. That's what we do because that is where the money is. And so the question is, what are we going to do about it? Any ideas?
Well, they have to pay their fixed costs and not pass them on to the ratepayer. We start right there.
That means organizing. That means a whole lot of organizing. There's decisions every week, every day. The power company needs something more. The power company needs a rate case. They need a permit. They need an extension. They need something every day. They're filing something at the Public Utilities Commission. And every time they file something, there's an opportunity to intervene. It's really hard to intervene. Ask me how I know.
Yeah, how do you know?
I know because I did it for 50 years. and well, actually, that's an exaggeration. But I did it for 40. And it's hard. It's hard work. I mean, what it means is you play lawyer. Either you have a lawyer or you are the lawyer, whether you're a lawyer or not. And I got to be good enough at it, so I got to beat the lawyers every once in a while. But it means, the point is that there's opportunities to intervene in decision making. And maybe we should spend some time prioritizing what decisions we should be intervening in. And maybe we should be talking about either how to raise enough money to hire the right attorneys or figure out who amongst us is going to go play lawyer for a while. But that's only one way to intervene. There's all sorts of other decision-making processes. There's legislative decision-making processes. We had a little get-together in front of Xcel headquarters the other day. Maybe it would be better or more efficient, maybe, if we were to figure out a routine in which we march 2 or 3 people up. How many people are going to die every week from this? How about if we send somebody up every week to go take a bus? Very publicly. I'm here to take an arrest because they're going to kill somebody today. And I don't like that. It's time, if we're going to get serious about this business, we're going to have to make some commitments that we haven't made yet. And we're going to have to figure out how to contact people, not just at Monticello, but at Prairie Island. There's a thing right now at Prairie Island. Prairie Island, we had a big fight over nuclear waste at Prairie Island. About
only 94.
94 is when it culminated. So that's 30 years ago. That was,
Pack it again, right?
that resulted, that was a hell of a fight. That fight, resulted in XL Energy, then it was still NSP. They got to put waste in canisters. They call them TN40s, transnuclear. 40 was the number of waste fuel assemblies they could put in each canister. And as a result of that fight, why we literally did drag the electric utility industry into the modern era, and you can read all about that in the book. But they use TN40 casks. TN40 casks are huge. They're this big around. They're 9 inches of rolled steel, 4.5 and a resin shield, and then 4.5 more inches of rolled steel with a huge lid on top of it. And you put these 40 waste assemblies into this canister that stands upright, and you put a lid on it and you seal it, except you have a monitor in there so you can tell whether or not you're leaking with it by the temperature variation. But the point is that TN40 casks are really, really heavy, and they're not going anywhere. They're not transport casks. Well, where's the waste gonna go? Is it just gonna stay on Prairie Island forever? Yeah, that is. But NSP doesn't like that, and neither does the NRC, and neither does the federal government writ large, because we need to have a federal waste program. It was Yucca Mountain. We could talk a long time about Yucca Mountain. But Yucca Mountain isn't gonna work for a whole lot of reasons. So now they're talking about a site in West Texas that the federal courts recently rejected, because among other things, it's sitting right on top of the Oglala Aquifer. But in order to get the waste from all of the reactor sites, all of the 60-some, 70-some reactor sites around the country, you gotta transport it. But you can't transport a TN40 cask, which means that in order to get the waste out of the cask, you have to get a big robot that's big enough to have 2 casks in it, including the TN40, and then robotically do a transfer. Either that or put it back in the pool and do it that way, which has a whole other set of issues. But so if they can't transport TN40 casks, it means that they want to start putting the waste into different casks now. And so that's a docket before the Public Utilities Commission and before decision makers in Minnesota and the federal government, including the tribe, as to how to get these whole-tech casks, which are smaller and so-called transportable. But there's an opportunity to intervene.
Flimsier.
Pardon?
Flimsier.
Yeah, they're flimsy. Well, they're big steel casks. They're not like TN40, but they can be transported. So the point is that there's all sorts of opportunities to get involved, and maybe we should have a committee that would sort of organize all of those decisions that are coming up and help us understand where's the roadmap as to where we should intervene. Where's the roadmap as to where we should be in order to raise these issues? Maybe we should just go park ourselves out in front of the Star Tribune and stay there until we got a story out of them. and start. We're gonna have to start thinking differently. We have a short amount of time. I don't know if you've been paying attention to what's happening on the planet. You know, when we have what happens when the river going down your valley takes your house and you're riding on top of it, waving to your neighbors until you die. The hurricanes are so much bigger. The fires are so much bigger. The ocean is cooking the coral, cooking it. You know, the ability of our planet to continue supporting us is diminishing rapidly. And most of us, we're like the frogs in the soup, you know? It's just croak, croak, croak. So we need different. We need different. We need to be thinking differently. We need to figure out more ways to get involved. We need to figure out how to better talk with our friends and neighbors and our aunts and uncles and our relatives, even though it is Thanksgiving. No, it's not Thanksgiving anymore. But we need to figure out how to engage with the body politic about how to make the changes that we need. So I don't know if there's questions. We were going to do questions. We were going to have discussions. What are we going to do?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it. All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, what would you like to do? Questions, discussion?
Let's just start with questions. Let's just start with that.
So it was a 3-inch pipe that broke down.
Well, I think it was more like a bigger than a 3-inch
Okay,
pipe.
it was mentioned at one point.
Maybe it was a 3-inch pipe, but it was a pipe. It was the pipe taking the primary water from the condenser building back to the reactor that corroded, and that's why we had the leak.
Yeah, it says 3 inches or 7.62 centimeters.
Yeah, so there you go.
That's what it says.
So you can imagine how long that leak was going on before they reported it, if they got up to 800,000 gallons.
Oh.
This is for you two. Mr. Barboza.
What can you tell us about the lifespan of the casks or these containers compared to the lifespan of the radioactive materials within them?
Yeah.
Well, it's no contest. Among the radioactive components that are the result of the fission explosion are things like plutonium. The half-life of plutonium is 24,000 years. The rule of thumb is that radioactive materials must undergo 10 half-lives. Are we familiar with the concept of half-life?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's after that period of time, the radiation content is half of what it was, half again, and there's another same period of time, 10 half-lives before radioactive materials are relatively benign from a biological perspective. So if the half-life of a significant component of the waste is 24,000 years, we're talking about geological time. And I don't think humans have a very good track record in terms of geological
So
time.
what's the lifespan of the casks?
That's a very good question, and we're going to find out.
Nobody knows.
The major, and it depends on what cask you're talking about. They've got quite a suite of casks now, and there's transport casks, there's storage casks, there's a variety of each with it. A transport cask is a very specialized thing because it's got to go down the highway or down the railroad tracks. It's got to move. And one of the things that happens to fuel, to nuclear fuel when it's in the core, is that over time there's a brittleization that happens, particularly after you've taken it out of the core and it goes into the pool, and then you take it out of the pool and it goes into a cask where it's dry. And so there's a whole nother set of chemical reactions that can happen. If you don't get every single molecule out of the cask when you're sealing it up, now you've got water running around in there causing corrosion. And who knows what that's going to do over time with it. There is degradation that happens to waste in the cask. there's potential for the fuel cladding that holds the fuel pellets to disintegrate or degrade enough to drop its pellets to the bottom of the cask. There's the potential over time for enough of that irradiated fuel to degrade, so you've got a pattern that goes critical at the bottom of a cask over time. We haven't been to that time yet, but it's coming. So there's a lot that can, and I'll just leave it at that.
Actually, thank you for your presentation and the inspiration. But I do have a kind of little bit of a technical question for Lindsay, because a friend of mine told me the other day that St. Paul doesn't get their water from the Mississippi. And you just read about, it was either the EIS or whatever, the report, that they do, and that there's a place where it goes to St. Paul. So I need details, because I couldn't write it down that fast.
To the best of my knowledge, St. Paul has a water intake on the Mississippi River that's 34 miles south of Monticello, and they do draw water through there. But that's just to the best of my knowledge.
They also have independent wells. St. Paul is not as dependent on the river for drinking water as Minneapolis is.
So they have a backup option, but they do take water from the
They do take water from the Mississippi.
I wonder if you would comment on the impact of the Chevron decision of the Supreme Court and this new efficiency program that Trump is promising on the regulatory agencies, the NRC, the EPA, and all of that. If we're going to try to cut all of those regulations, what the implications are.
That's a pretty good question. On the one hand, you could almost say, so what? You know, because, I mean, look at how they do now.
Yeah.
Right? So how much would we lose by that? And it might actually make things a lot more visible and transparent to the general public.
Well, a judge may make the decision rather than the so-called bureaucrats,
Yeah.
but it depends on who's appointed,
Yeah.
who the judge is.
Yeah, and so the issue is, what is the impact to the public?
Yeah.
Right? And one of the ways that I look at it when I wake up from my nightmares is that, okay, let's get rid of all of those stupid bureaucrats, because I've been fighting with them my whole damn life, and I know how bad they are. You know, if that's the deep state, boy, it's not very deep. But there's a facade. I mean, we're still here talking about it, right? They haven't eliminated the body politic yet with their mismanagement. We see trends with it. So, you know, it's in my mind at this point, it's almost like, you know, okay, Spanky won. You know what Spanky is? Spanky?
Little rascal?
Spanky, no.
No.
Spanky. You know who Stormy was? Stormy Daniels? Stormy Daniels. Stormy Daniels chased Spanky around with a rolled up newspaper, swatting his bare ass because he couldn't get it up. That's Spanky. So let's not hear any more of this Trump shit. That's Spanky. And I think we ought to call him what he is. So anyway, as the bureaucracy undergoes whatever changes the new administration is going to bring, it will create opportunities for people. If people are engaged, if people are focused, if people know where to be looking and understand what decisions are coming down and where to put themselves, not necessarily a formal intervention, because maybe it is a formal intervention, but there's decisions, and if we know where the decisions are and we organize ourselves to get there, maybe we can do a little better even.
They have the COP 25, I think.
Yeah.
But
29.
going at the environment globally instead of dealing with Spanky. seemed to be decided about 10, 15 years ago, but the moneymakers like having local control, but all these things affect the entire planet. So what we're doing for ourselves, we're doing for, people in Africa, and ending war is something that is gonna allow more people to live longer, and having adequate energy. So
Well,
going local just is frustrating.
well, the thing of it is that the technologies are now available with us. They're readily available, they're cost effective, they're efficient, they
Talking
work.
about windmills and solar panels?
Solar, wind, biofuels of various sorts, hydrogen is coming on strong. With it, yeah, a lot of geothermal opportunities. So the technology, and they're mature, right? It's not like they're up and coming, they're here. But they challenge the ability of the cartel, of the monopoly to maintain its monopoly, and that's the challenge. And when we get clear-eyed about what the actual decision is, and why we have to have a Public Utilities Commission to regulate solar power, I mean, that's bizarre. I mean, so, but it's part of it's that the industry is going to undergo a transformation. It's in the process of it now. And it's a matter of whether or not that transformation to the modern era deals with the monopoly situation that the cartels now have, as opposed to the economic democracy that the modern technologies promise. And so if we figure out how to do it here, if we figure out in Minnesota how to get it right, I'll tell you, that'll help Africa, that'll help India, that'll help everywhere, that'll help South America, to see models where the citizens who use power in their own communities are engaged in the decision-making as to which technologies they're deploying, because they're all, they get cheaper as we make more of them. They get cheaper as more of the modern technologies get deployed. And so there's no reason why, I mean, just because you don't have the world's richest wind resource doesn't mean you don't have a harvestable wind resource. And if you couple that with storage technologies and solar technologies and hydrogen and other technologies, why there's no reason why every community, including every community in Minneapolis, neighborhood by neighborhood, could not be energy self-sufficient. The resources are there, the technologies are there to harness it. It's that we're trapped in this regulatory, in the historical, as the electric utility industry grew and matured, why because of those economies of scale at the central station machines, we find ourselves in this situation now where we don't need to have that kind of bureaucracy. And if we were to get rid of the bureaucracy that manages electric utilities because we don't need them anymore, because each community is managing its own, think of what that would be to the mega crowd. Just wait over here.
I have a question. Actually, I think maybe anyone can comment on this, but I think specifically, I see Lindsay, I think it was. I'm sorry, I just your name. Lindsay?
That's mine.
Okay, yeah, the question for you. So we live in a world where it's harder and harder to find institutions we trust. Right? We're losing, like, which institutions do we trust? We saw that during the pandemic, right? The WHO, and we trust the government to tell us what to do. My question would be, when we're trying to sort through issues like this, who can we trust? If we can't, like, is there any institution that we can trust to understand what the challenges are? Because I'm skeptical of, like, the internet, do your own research stuff. There's some things I don't know enough about. So, could you name some institutions? Like, if I read this government report or the UN or WHO, these are good things that you would consider trustworthy, or are we just suspicious of everything?
Nuke Watch?
No, Nuke Watch is not an institution, not a sole source of information. I think that's a challenging question to answer because in some ways, like you're saying, on the internet you can find anything that you seek to find. And you can find someone justifying it by any means necessary. So in some ways, choosing to try to justify something by seeking out some answer you already have in mind to intercept in that research is sort of like approaching science as if it's a chosen religion. To me, I try to look through the information that's there, so that with all of this information from the NRC, you can couple that with information that's also published by the NRC that says that there is no safe dose of radiation. And so, and you can couple that with information from the health department in Minnesota that also has a statement that there's no safe dose of radiation. I think that broadening the scope of the information you take in is probably the best thing to do. Learning as much as you can from as many sources as possible, sources that are maybe accredited or sources that at least have been working on this for a long period of time. I know that there are groups that have been researching this for a long time. Like there's Arjun Makhijani is one scientist who's been doing a fair amount of research on tritium for a while. There's a professor at Harvard right now who has funding to start researching tritium around 3 New England reactors. Some of that funding is coming from Harvard. They're going to do some of the research that Joe Mangano's done using like Massachusetts Health Department information around cancers, but they're also going to take their own blood samples and do their own lab work there. But you may not trust a professor at Harvard. So I can't tell you who to trust, but I just think taking in, educating yourself from a variety of sources.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to comment on that question?
That was good.
I'd like to take it back to your previous point about the desire for activism, to do something about this. The complexity of what you explained, which I can follow because I have to used to debate NSP. Their Achilles heel back then, 79, 80, was always the waste. What are you going to do with the waste? It's still their Achilles heel, and frankly, I don't think the public gives a shit. Not enough to care to motivate people largely. I think this election shows us the economic issues. What's it going to cost me? Is where we reach people in a fundamental way, pocketbook way. And you easily can tell them that transmission line isn't needed. You're going to have to pay for it, by the way. We don't even need it. I can save you that money. We just go this other way. Similarly, with a number of these other issues, it can be motivational, like the State Investment Board, which Third Act has been following with that and the banks, right? Because they have a huge amount of money in fossil fuels. To get them out of fossil fuel industry, bad for your health, bad for the state, bad for everything. So when we can convince enough people that is economically in their self-interest, they might at least listen to us, they might even believe us, and then they might even join us. Because frankly, we need this room multiplied by 1,000 to be effective in making something change.
Speaking of that, there's a sign-up sheet going around. Where is that? Does somebody have it? We gotta get everybody's name for starters in this room.
Your name's on the table right now. You didn't get it?
Has everybody signed it?
No, it didn't make it over.
It didn't make it around, okay. We'll make that around. Then the second thing I was gonna say is you mentioned the Public Utility Commission having something in February. That's just 2 months away now. It seems like we should have a presence, a big presence. Is it that kind of meeting where everybody taking public comment and?
It's the kind of meeting where I think we could go and shut it down.
Okay.
But that's just me.
Sarah and I spoke at it last year.
Yeah.
And,
But there is opportunity, you know,
yeah.
and maybe you wanna do it on their terms and go and be nice and give them comments. But, maybe we should rethink how we approach some of these decisions.
Well, just to segue from this fellow about what's cheap and what's gonna affect your pocketbook, I've heard it said many times that, the green energy solutions like wind and solar are 4 times cheaper and infinitely safer than nuclear power. And I'm George, I'm sure you can say much more about that, and I have a question for you, George. I think you'd be the one best to answer this, anyway. We're starting to make some inroads here for local, community, solar power, individual households. I mean, we're starting to get there. But why is it that there's nothing going on locally with wind? And I know that I'm almost sure that the answer is it has something to do with the political blockades. But what's going on there? Because every neighborhoods and houses could have their own wind generators. They don't have to be a great big. They could be, almost like a house vent, like an attic vent. They don't have to be that big. What's going on there? Why aren't we getting anywhere with wind local?
Well, there are challenges with doing wind in urban settings. Wind takes up a lot more room. I mean, there are devices that you can attach to your house, but you have to remember that you got a spinning blade going. And do you know how a violin works? So if you're attaching something that has this potential to vibrate to a sound box, you might want to rethink that. But the point is that the technologies that we need to do it are available, and there's all sorts of there's tons of solar that could happen easily within the city, and that could be backed up with storage, and it's also possible. I mean, I had a conversation with the Minneapolis City Council on several occasions over 10 years ago about how the city would contract with some Indian tribes up by Granite Falls, in particular, is where we were thinking of, by Morton, where the tribe would own the wind farm and designated transmission to the city, have a contract with Xcel Energy as the facilitator with it. Well, that got in the way of Xcel's monopoly, and so that type of development we weren't able to pursue it for a variety of reasons. But the point that we should remember is that the technologies are available to do energy right, and what the precise mix is for any given community ought to be the business of that community. Because they're the ones who live there, they're the ones who will be using it, they're the ones who will be responsible for it. And so it's more of a social structure question than a technology question, is what I would put. Yeah, Ken.
I'd like to, you brought up on economics. I think that's the key. I read your book, and you talked about a solution. And today is like we can't rely on the big guys getting their acts together. We need to get the message out to the people of this economic opportunity that's there for the taking. And how do we get that message out in a succinct manner that can relate to the people, where they can see their local communities, hey, this is a way to really do an economic renewal to this local town out in western Minnesota. It would really make a difference. So how do we do that? How do we get your solution that's in the book out to the public?
Well, we wait till a reactor has a leak, and then we talk about it.
Yeah.
And then we foment amongst ourselves about what are we going to do with each other and in the communities that we live. There's some organizing to do, Ken, and who's going to do it? That's what he's got weighing.
Wham's gonna do it? Yes.
Wham, community power.
And others.
Another small
inroad, maybe it goes somewhere, but another of our board members, George may be the oldest of our board members.
Not quite.
Or, yeah, but maybe the longest standing. But the newest board member we have, Zam is applying for a seat on the Public Utilities Commission as we speak. The seat's coming open in January. She's an electrical engineer and has done microgrid and all kinds of good work around Minnesota and in California. We don't know yet if she'll win or if she'll get the seat and be appointed. Maybe call Governor Walz and say, hey, there's a woman named Zam Moose who's applying and would be a great addition to the Public Utilities Commission. Please appoint her, right? So,
Does she work for Excel?
She was a contractor to Excel at some point, yeah.
Okay. I think I've heard her at another.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Extremely sharp.
Well, there's a campaign
Yep.
to get her
Yep.
on.
Get her on the commission.
Yeah.
Wrote her a letter of support last week. I don't know how much that helps. We tried.
Did I hear earlier talk about forming a committee to start putting things together or putting together ideas to move forward with this?
We have them, and now you're on it.
You are welcome to join the committee of the WHAM is
Coalition for Nuclear.
Yeah.
called Monticello, no, called Coalition for Nuclear Free Mississippi River. You are all welcome to join that. We have meetings every other Wednesday, over Zoom. There are people from all over the country on our coalition, and we're trying to do something. We really are.
That's
And
why
we
we're
need
here.
help.
And the cause for this coalition coming together happened to be that these groups were coalescing around the emergence of this specific leak at Monticello, but as George mentioned, that's just the seed for a far greater issue and movement that needs to happen. And it's a diverse set of groups right now, groups that have done pipeline work, groups that have done other environmental work. And so I think they're coming together representing a greater desire to transition to community power, to renewable energy. And so I don't think that in order to come to this coalition, you necessarily have to have a vested interest in this specific myopic issue at Monticello. You can also be interested in those other greater issues, and that could still function as a space for planning around how to start to make inroads in this direction. I think it's meant to be a jumping off point for that.
One thing I've been working on is the idea of creating community, not just community work, but which I think it sounds like what this coalition is, but the collaboration of groups, so they have common interests. Now, maybe they're not working on tritium, but maybe they're working on some other issue around this, related to nuclear and to nuclear power, to nuclear weapons, whatever. And there are a lot of groups like that. There are a lot of activist groups like that in the country. And so it's the idea of collaborating, which I think the community collaboration, we've seen this happen here in the Twin Cities with the issues around the urban farm and around the Smith, closing down Smith, where they've been very successful with community collaboration. And I think it's a very important concept that we need to remember. When people talk about community, but they don't put in the word collaboration, and yet that is exactly what you just described. Still, so I think that collaboration can go all over the country eventually. I mean, and there are a lot of activist groups up and down the river too that already exist that may be, activists, but they'd be interested in these questions.
Speaking of which there's one more thing that I sort of forgot to mention, that we have a whole other international dimension to this thing now, that the Canadian government has decided where their repository for irradiated fuel is. And it's just north of here. So it's within the Great Lakes watershed, is my understanding with it. And so it's not just the river that we need to be mindful of. There's also, the lakes and the rivers, and the people, all of them.
In the air.
And the air, yeah.
Store of fresh water.
So there's all sorts of opportunity for that networking and for that collaboration to happen, and it's time that we start putting some substance to it. I think it's time to start some action.
I think you're exactly right, and there are groups in the coalition, like I said, who have previously worked on other issues of water protection or on issues against pipelines. There are groups that have worked on promoting solar, and so I think that there's cause to find our common interests here, and that will go a long way.
So, when the power of the nuclear plant finally does shut down, what becomes of it exactly?
It sits there.
What becomes of?
Of the plant?
Well, there's a very elaborate decommissioning process that they have to go through, and part of what that involves is cutting up all of the components to shippable size and then sending them somewhere.
Yeah.
And they have a hard time figuring out where somewhere is. There's also, so that's in addition to the irradiated
Is that
fuel.
what part of the reason they want to keep it going?
Well, as long as they keep it going, they don't have to worry about
What to do with it?
Somebody else's land.
Yeah. And that's where their money, Monticello, when Monticello is operating, the electricity that it generates itself contributes about $1 million a day, over $1 million a day into that Xcel Energy coffers. That's why they keep it going.
Didn't they just have to do a rehab that was supposed to be 300 million and ended up over 600 million?
Well,
And then the case of who's gonna pay for it?
yeah, actually, that's an interesting story too, because it was in the 2009-10 timeframe that Monticello was relicensed for the second time, and in the course of that, they had to do an elaborate refabrication. They had a whole lot of maintenance and other things that they needed to do. I intervened in that case against it. I said, no, there's so many other ways that we could provide ourselves with the electric utility services. It's the last intervention I ever did with them. And we pointed out how the way to do it with renewable energy and efficiency would cost less than half as much as refurbishing the plant. And the commission said, no, we're gonna refurbish the plant. And it turned out that we were wrong. It cost 6 times as much. Not twice as much as what we said it would. They did it anyway, and nobody cared.
Well, did anybody really know?
Well, see, nobody cared.
Well, you can't, it
If
doesn't,
if
the media
people,
doesn't pick
if
it up.
people care, they will know. That's why you're here, because you care. If people care, they will know. And it's high time we cause more people to care.
Amen.
I will just say the comments we made, and you know, that report that was produced of the comments people made, and then the response that was it the NRC made to that. You know, we laid out all these terrible things, and the staff said, yeah, we know that, nothing new here. Let's go ahead and license it. I mean, it was just like, excuse me, they didn't bother to refute it. They just said, yeah, we know that.
Well, they know it, but the general public.
So you mentioned earlier that the decisions should be put into the hands of the residents who live generates their electricity. One concern I've always been with is like, you know, in a larger, more densely population, like, you know, a city like this, maybe an apartment building, we have lots of residents, you know, and not a whole lot of land, you know, if wind and solar and renewables are gonna be able to do the trick. And I guess my question is, if we put the decision to the hands of the residents, what would you say to them if their decision was to instead, if they decided what was best for them is maybe build a small nuclear plant or natural gas plant or something like that, because they thought that would be best suited for their needs based on their geography and population density or something?
If they were the ones paying for it, they'd probably come to a different conclusion. It's straight economics with that. I mean, like I said earlier, I said, who knows the difference between a megawatt and a kilowatt hour, right? As a society, we are functionally illiterate about energy.
And a lot of other things.
A lot of other things, but specifically energy. And it's in that vacuum of knowledge that the vested interests walk. That's why they get away with it, because people simply don't know. They're ignorant with it. But part of what happens when we democratize energy, part of the promise of renewable technologies is that they're at the scale that people can wrap their head around. And if we look at it from a substation by substation approach, and that gets a little complicated in the urban setting, but it's doable, because there are neighborhoods and we know where the wires are and how they go and all of that, so we can sort that out. But if we organize ourselves on a sort of a substation footprint by footprint basis, why we'll be in a position of economic democracy with that, because the people who are living there will be in a position to control which technologies they choose to use and how to pay for them and how to manage the system, when is it time to upgrade the transmission so we can push something back. I mean, we're not talking about dismantling the higher voltage system, but we could certainly figure out how to use the infrastructure that we have already bought and paid for much, much, much more efficiently and elegantly if we were to get serious about the technologies that can be sited and sized to serve local communities. The beauty of the modern technologies is that you can make them as big as you want, or as small as you want. They're modular, so they can conform to whatever needs any given community has. And it's that versatility that allows, and the rising efficiencies of these technologies that allows us to be, once we understand the difference between a kilowatt and a megawatt hour, to make some headway in terms of the decision making.
I'll say one other quick thing to that question, which is just that there's a sort of example of what you're talking about that happened out in Idaho. It was actually the first licensed small modular reactor, nuclear reactor project that was going to take place, and Xcel was actually slated to be the operator of that. But over the course of the time that this was being negotiated, the estimated rates that the shareholders would have to pay kept being raised higher and higher and higher and higher as the cost of production, the timeline for production also ballooned, and eventually the proposed shareholders pulled out, and so the project tanked. So in that case, the people who were going to be buying that power said, no, we don't want to pay for that.
So one way to look at it, the most recent reactor to come online was down in Georgia, the Volt plant with it. That cost, the cost of that, the installed capacity cost of that plant is quite a bit north of $13,000 per kilowatt. 13,000 north of that, closer to 16 or 18. I've seen all the way up to 20, but it's certainly more than $13,000 per kilowatt. The cost right now of solar is less than 1,000 per installed kilowatt. Wind, about 2 per installed kilowatt. Battery storage, if if you like batteries. There's other ways to store, but if you're gonna look at batteries, maybe 4 per mega, for depending on what your duration is, you could get about $4,000 per megawatt hour for storage for when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. So the point is that there's ways to get dispatchable power into any community you want at a small fraction of what the industry is willing to pay, to make you pay for.
And that the federal government's going to subsidize.
And that the government subsidizes in order to preserve the monopoly. That's all it's about. It's market share. That's all it's about.
So the power for that is in the monopoly, it's in the money, right? So, you know, it's always a little disconcerting to think you can go and you can give testimony to a forum like at Excel and say, hey, you've got to do this, when actually it's in most cases it's already decided.
It's clear.
And so we need to be thinking about how do we go after the
Well, if it gets to the, there are those who say if it gets to the decision-making arena, why you've already been beat.
right.
Right? So we got a lot of stuff that we need to talk about as to how we do that.
Right, and collaborative communities, exactly, yeah.
I have to run, George, but I wanted to give one shout out to our friends over there in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Has anybody seen what just happened there?
No.
That fateful day in November when all kinds of elections happened? They did a good thing. They created a sustainable energy utility. It's a municipal thing. They're not gonna bother with trying to get rid of all the other utilities, let them go their way. But they're gonna pay and invest in their citizens to everybody start getting involved to create their own energy. It's a smaller city than we are, you know, their challenges probably aren't as great as ours. But it's maybe a glimmer of hope. It's something that's going in the right direction.
It could be a model.
Could be a model.
It is a model already, and it's a matter of how we can.
The state of Delaware did something in those lines in 2007. It's a way different case, but we gotta keep looking into those models. And that might fit what we need here in the great Twin Cities.
Well, before everybody goes, don't forget to buy your book.
Don't forget to sign up for,
And sign up.
Mississippi, the Coalition for a Nuclear Free Mississippi.
Veterans for Peace.